Good afternoon, everyone. This is Megan Jones from ICEA. Welcome you to another one of our Webinar Wednesdays, featuring one of the many presentations that were scheduled for our workshop in San Antonio. This and all of the distance learning series webinars this year will count as 1 hour of training towards your CCEA recertification, so keep your confirmation in your records for when your renewal is due. I have had the distinct pleasure of working closely with today's speaker, who's the lead author of ICEA's upcoming software cost estimating body of knowledge. Carol Deckers from Quality Plus Technologies will be our guide today to estimate around some hidden explosives. Carol?
Thank you, Megan. And I'm back at you. It's been a pleasure to work with ICEA on the software cost estimation body of knowledge and everybody that's associated with ICEA. So welcome to anybody who's joining us today. And if you're not a software guru, you're in luck, because I'm assuming that you don't know anything about software estimation. So a little bit about my company. I'm a US-based consulting, training, coaching services company in project management, PMP training, software cost estimation, software measurement, especially in function points or functional sizing. I've done work in benchmarking, scope management, ISO standards, and things like that. So who am I? Well, I live in Florida, which gives us some incredible sunsets. And I tell people that sunsets are my zen. So right now I'm under contract with ICEA to be the lead author of the software cost estimation body of knowledge, or the software CBOC. I'm a consultant, speaker, author. I've been a US delegate and project manager, project editor to international standards for the past 25 plus years. I'm a past president of the International Function Point Users Group. I participated with the International Software Benchmarking Standards Group and other things. Got about 25 years of software measurement experience, so I'm not a newbie. And things that give me joy are sunsets, sailing, travel, and people everywhere. I've spoken in 30 plus countries, and not being able to travel during these times is kind of a pain. So in terms of an agenda, I want to go over a little bit about software project cost estimation, a little bit about software project requirements and demystifying those that should help you, especially if you're not familiar with software estimation, in being able to make a little bit more sense of what software is all about. A little bit about estimating before requirements, and then we'll talk about DYB and guesstimating, and hopefully have a little bit of time for questions and answers. So when we're doing a project estimate, we really need to focus on things like the scope and the quality of the product we're going to be producing. We need to estimate effort, we need to estimate cost, and we need to estimate a schedule. So if I take a look at the word estimate, it can be used as a verb, as in to form an approximate judgment or opinion regarding the worth, amount, size, weight of, or calculate approximately. To form an opinion, it can be used with or without an object, and it can be a noun, as an estimate, an approximate judgment, and a judgment or opinion of the qualities of a person or thing. And in software, when we're talking about software, because software is an intangible product, oftentimes people look at software developers and say, oh my gosh, they're just, nerds. They are the engineers and we can't really understand them. So we have to take whatever they say as being gospel, and therefore their estimates often become forecasts, often become budgets. That can be a problem. In software in particular, our project goals are faster, better, cheaper, quicker technology, delivered on time and on budget. Well, we've got some typical estimating challenges. Things like, are our requirements, are the things that we're estimating complete and accurate? Those are our inputs. We need to know what we know, and we need to have some assumptions. We've got to look at estimating models. Are the estimating models that we're using applicable? Are they available? Is the data appropriate on which we're basing our estimate? And our estimates, are they consistent? What's in or out of scope? And that goes whether we're talking about the cost or the effort or the duration. Who's in the corral? Whose effort are we estimating? What are the costs that we're including? And oftentimes when I look at software estimation or estimation in general, it's kind of like this dog chasing its tail cycle. What do I mean by that? Well, We start off with really poor requirements, and especially in software development. We start off with requirements that could be outcomes. We want to have a financial system or something like that. So we've got these poor requirements. That leads to really poor estimates. And what happens with really poor estimates? We end up in contracts and engagements where we can't deliver because why? The estimate was not good. Why wasn't the estimate good? Because it was based on poor requirements. Well, what happens the minute we start on a new project? Things change. And we end up with poor change management, and we end up in a situation where contractually, oftentimes we may say, you know what, that wasn't in the firm fixed price. That's actually a change. And the customer sits back and says, no, 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 it was implied. And we end up pointing at each other. What happens then? Changes end up getting thrown over the fence into the next phase, where again we'll have poor requirements, leading to poor estimates and more poor change management. And that becomes a vicious cycle. That becomes kind of like the dog chasing its tail. What's that lead to? Cost and schedule overruns. Not a good situation. And all you have to do is Google something like cost overruns, and you'll end up with more than enough proof. So we've got these cost and schedule overruns. That leads to a major problem. So let's talk about software requirements, which is, kind of that major problem. There's 3 distinct types of software requirements. When I'm taking a look at requirements that I've said, okay, we're going to build software out of these requirements. We've got our functional requirements and our non-functional requirements, which essentially are our user requirements. We then have our technical or build requirements, and that's how developers turn those software requirements into the actual software. And altogether, those become what we would call our project requirements. So let me talk a little bit about what constitutes those different types of software requirements. We've got our functional requirements, and these are the things that tell you what the software shall do. It's documented with things like use cases or user stories or software requirement specifications. These are really the responsibility of the customer or the sponsor or the users to define. These are objective, they're documented, and we can quantify these and therefore estimate them using things like the functional size of software, using things like function points. These are a key input to estimating, and think of functional requirements kind of like the floor plan for software. If I said to you, how big is your house or how big is a building? You could tell me something in square feet or square meters. That's kind of like, how big is my floor plan? Analogously, that is what we're doing when we're talking about functional requirements in software. Non-functional requirements are how good does the software have to be in terms of suitability, accuracy, interoperability, compliance, security, reliability, all of those utility type things. Again, those are the responsibility of customers or users to define. We document those with supplementary specifications that can be documented with user stories. They can be quantified using things like snap points, which is software non-functional assessment process, or within some of the methods, some of the function point methods, a value adjustment factor, or a technical factor, or an environmental factor, as is used in use case points. They're COCOMO 2 effort multipliers. And the effects of non-functional requirements, the how good does the software have to be, can effectively double an estimate. Think of non-functional requirements kind of like an international code for building things. If I live in Florida, which I do, we need to have hurricane-proof windows. I need to have hurricane hangers, which are clips that tack my roof onto my building. It doesn't tell me how I'm going to build it. It tells me how good that building has to be. And then we've got technical requirements, and that's how the development team will actually turn those requirements into software. So it's how the development team will develop or build the software. It's often influenced by my functional and my non-functional requirements. So think about this. How I build a building is influenced by what is the building, how big is that building, how good does that building have to be. And this includes things like the environment, it includes the tools and the methods, the skills, the development language, whether I'm doing something using an Agile paradigm or a waterfall paradigm. This is how am I going to build it? It's not a user responsibility, but think of this kind of like the blueprints for software. So we've got our floor plan, that's our functional requirements. We've got our building code, that's how we're going to build, that's how good does it have to be. And then we turn that really into the blueprints for software. It's not part of use cases, it's not part of function points, but it adds to the cost. So if I decide to use a package versus hand building something, if I decide to use power tools like Java instead of something that is much longer, much slower, such as COBOL, those types of things are going to affect my cost. And that's part of how I'm going to build it. Developers, software developers view requirements kind of as a blending. Everything goes in together, everything becomes a requirement. And so they'll talk about architectures and they'll talk about the blueprints and how they're going to do configuration management, things like that. So everything to a developer gets mixed up into this big ball of kind of unified yarn. And that's all the project requirements. That can cause some problems because our customers view requirements differently. They view them as the functionality of what they need the software to do. They view them as how good, how high quality does this piece of software have to be. And the technical requirements, similar to blueprints in a house, are things that become technical and confusing to customers. So even if I can leave you with one little teeny tiny piece of advice, when you're going in and talking to a customer or working with customers on costing, it's important sometimes to be able to delineate between what are the functional requirements, what are the non-functional requirements, and what are the technical requirements, because they can absolutely stand behind the functional and non-functional. So let's do a quick segue into Agile user stories. And you may have heard of Agile user stories, and that is simply a way of documenting the requirements and the requirements for software. User stories are a collection of high-level software requirements that go into something called a backlog, which is essentially a prioritized pile. If you can think of having a pile of laundry, it's similar to that, where you have your requirements that are the highest priority in the top. User stories can include functional user stories, in other words, the functionality that we talked about with functional requirements. User stories can also include non-functional requirements, all of those abilities that we were talking about. They can also include things like the technical user stories, things to do with architecture and hardware, and they can have other requirements such as things like research spikes or bugs that they're working on. User stories can absolutely be interrelated and overlapping. And in user stories in Agile development, because we don't have all of the requirements defined up front, it can be difficult to quantify that size up front because the details emerge during the sprints. One note is that the choice of the paradigm, whether you choose to build something in Agile versus software versus waterfall versus hybrid, is really part of the technical requirements on how we build software. So what do we have for software estimating techniques? These are not new to you. Anybody who's a cost estimator is familiar with the techniques, but certain ones are more applicable to software. So we take our functional requirements, our non-functional requirements, our technical requirements, we churn those through to get estimates of our cost, our effort, and our schedule. We can use things like an analogy, parametric, where we're comparing to history and multiple types of history. We can have expert opinion, which some people are really surprised at. In software development, expert opinion is often used because we don't have the volumes of data that we may necessarily have for hardware or manufacturing or construction projects. We can do extrapolation from actuals if we're partway through and we need to do estimates for completion. And engineering buildup, which really doesn't apply much to software unless we're doing procurement and purchasing of software packages. Software estimation is non-trivial. It takes a lot of work, and history is really repeatable. So relying on a good historical database could be much better than relying on theoretical models. So when we take a look at project estimation, it's kind of like an iceberg. if you think about the top of the iceberg, those are the things you absolutely see. Those are your known knowns. So there's things you absolutely know. If I'm doing a banking piece of software, I know I need to have accounts. I know I need to have customers. I know I need to have products. Then you've got your known unknowns, and those are the things that are right on the surface. Those are the things that you may not have explicitly defined, but they've come up on every project for the last 15 projects. So those are the things that you know are going to come up, but we may not know them that well. And then there's the unknown unknowns. So those are the things you had no idea about. Good, solid estimates are built on the knowns and plan for the unknowns. Now, I mentioned that I live in Florida, so we have hurricanes. And one of the things I like to look at is the predictive modeling. And people say, well, oh my gosh, you've got all these models for hurricanes. And yet hurricanes are incredibly elusive. And I kind of compare that to software estimation. You start out with models. Why are the predictions wrong? Well, estimates and predictions are based on the best information possible and available at the time. If you take a look at software, they say, according to the Standish Group Chaos Report, that we are wrong with our estimates anywhere from 2/3, 40% to 2/3 of the time. Why is that? Well, we start out with very, very, very unknowns. There's two problems. We can base it on the wrong data, and we can have flawed assumptions. So when we're doing a hurricane prediction, if our original thought is that it started out off of the coast of Haiti, and really the hurricane started out off the coast of Africa, that's a major problem. Things change all the way through, and that can happen on our software estimates too. So what are some examples of what we can do? We can start off with some estimating formulas. We can have some predictability. We've got project cost ratios. We can look at things like dollars per function point or dollars per slot. We can take a look at formulas. We've got support cost ratios, repair cost ratios. We can start looking at some solid information. The Government Accountability Office recently produced a cost estimation guide in 2020, and they said, here's some of the major cost estimation challenges. Things like unreliable data and unrealistic assumptions, and historical cost databases are not available. All those things are problematic. How can we mitigate that? Well, we can start taking a look at historical data, well-trained and experienced analysts, having a stable program, taking a look at risk analysis, having something that's well-defined and documented, and an adequate cost reserve. So today, estimating with good requirements and a solid model is similar to kind of having a mapped minefield. There's a lot of things that we can learn, there's a lot of history we can use, and there's a lot of solid models we can use to do better software cost estimation. And now here's my unabashedly self-promoting advertisement for the software CBOC, which is coming out in 2021 that we're working on. And Dr. Kristen Smart and Megan Jones did an outstanding presentation at ITCast about the software cost estimation body of knowledge. So if you're interested, go to this, go to the link on the SEO website, and you'll be able to find out everything that's coming out. And really, we're putting a lot of science into what might have been considered in the past kind of an esoteric type of situation. We're putting in solid best practices that the world uses for doing better software cost estimation. So that's when we've got solid requirements. So we've got some ideas, we've got models and history. What happens if we estimate before requirements? Yikes. Does that ever happen to you? Do you ever have to perform an estimate before you've got requirements? I guess the question really is, can you estimate an idea? I have a great idea. Can you estimate that? Well, here's what happened to me. When I was in software development, and I was a developer, I used to have managers who would call me up and say, Carol, you're a great project manager. Let me buy you lunch. And I'd go for lunch and they'd pull out this serviette or a napkin and we'd be sitting there and they'd say, okay, I have an idea. Can you give me a really quick estimate? And they would take it out and it would have either marinara sauce or the napkin would have, coffee stains. And they'd say, okay, hang on, I won't hold you to it. Just give me a ballpark cost. This project that I have in mind is kind of sort of like, I need some numbers. I need some numbers today. Has that ever happened to you? Well, a light should go off in your head. Danger, this is a minefield. Yikes, warning, warning. At this point, when this is going off in my head, usually the manager would say, Carol, I really won't hold you to it. Have some dessert. And here's what goes on inside my mind, kind of like a movie. It's like, okay, right now it's just an idea. What's it going to look like? Is it going to be like the project on the left where we've got very little showing up and, oh my gosh, the project's going to be huge? Or is it more like the one on the right where I've got a lot of knowns, some unknowns, but I don't know what's beneath the surface? Is it actually multiple projects? This is what goes on inside my little head. When I look at a project process model, I can take a look at schedules versus deliverables versus resources. I can go to historical databases. I can do all of this stuff. I can take a look at project measures, product size, but I don't have time. And you know what? An idea happens way before I've got solid data. So this is truly a minefield. We talk about in software estimation and in software development, this thing called the cone of uncertainty. And the cone of uncertainty, if I start out with a project at the feasibility stage, I'm going to be anywhere between 400 times or 4 times underestimating to 400% overestimating. And it's going to be a problem. I can take a look at the laws, but history repeats itself. And even if I involve executives, engineers, project managers, all that into my estimation, if I'm starting out with an idea and that's all I have is a napkin, I'm really in the minefield. So when faced with a napkin, what can I do? Well, there's a couple of things. I could refuse to play. I could say, you know what? No, I've been down this road before. I'm not going to do that. I could play the memory game. I could say, well, it's kind of sort of like a project we did a couple of years ago. I could kind of like mutter, this is against my professional ethics, and kind of like take off and leave out the back door. I could come up with something like in The Spy Who Shagged Me, where they say $1 million in 6 months. So I could do a silly, wild, approximate guess. Or I could make a promise and then start working on my resume and disappear. But none of those really seem like they would work for me. So, or I could do my best and guesstimate. So any number that I give at this point is going to be wrong, absolutely. But know that anything that I document, do my best, document assumptions, and my sizing estimates, that's a way forward. So let's go through that. So what does that mean to do my best and guesstimate? I can document my base assumptions. I can document my functional size, or if I had some idea of how many lines of code, I could document that. I can document my non-functionals. I can document how robust this is going to have to be. Am I going to have very, very high quality because it's a medical system? I can document some of my technical requirements that I'm assuming, and I can take a look at historical growth percentages. I can document my assumptions and do at least 2 estimates. I can do a rough order of magnitude based on an analogy or just my expert opinion, knowing that I'm still very carefully walking in this minefield. And really importantly, I can save that napkin because there's scrawls and sketches put all over that, which really formulate the basis of what I'm going to be using for my estimate. So what do I do with documenting base assumptions? Well, I can document the functional size. And for any of you that don't know what functional size is, it really is my square feet for software. And I can do that without even going to massive amounts of training by using shortcuts. I can use things like a one file model where I say, you know what? I know it's about 3 entities and each entity is about 31 function points apiece. So this is about 100 function points. I can use something like simple function points, which the Department of Homeland Security and a federal group of 13 different agencies are working to provide requirements, patterns based on simple function points. And that reduces the amount of time and energy I have to put into things. Any transactions, I could say, you know what, I think there's about 500 transactions that'll be performed, elementary processes. And each of those would get multiplied in the simple function point manner by 4.6. I then take however many data entities I think I have and I multiply that by 7. So that would give me just an approximate high-level approximation of size. I could use something like t-shirt sizing. This is not the t-shirt sizing that we do within user stories or what we do on Agile software development for sprints. This is t-shirt sizing where I say extra small feels like an extra small system, and that's probably going to be up to about 200 function points. I can take a look at historical profiles, such as what we can provide from the International Software Benchmarking Standards Group, or I could use patterns. I could say, you know what? I think this is about this big. So remember, I'm working with this serviette, this napkin, and what I'm doing when I'm documenting and estimating the functional size, guesstimating, is really figuring out how big do I think this floor plan is going to be. I can document my base assumptions in terms of my non-functional size or my non-functional impact in terms of entities. I can take a look and document my assumptions of standard constraints, the performance and the security and any sort of special needs I think are going to be there. I can consider an adjustment factor, or I can take a look at something like software non-functional assessment process or snap points. I would always want to overestimate the complexity because seldom do you get into a project and say, you know what, this was so much easier than I ever imagined. Usually you say, wow, who would have guessed this would be this difficult? And we can compare historical profiles. We can say, you know what, we thought that other project was so simple. It wasn't. This is fairly similar. I can also document my base assumptions about the technical requirements. I think I'm going to use .NET and Java. I'm going to use the similar types of system tools. I can take a look at things like my uniqueness potential. Is it brand new subject matter? Do I need to hire special skills? Those types of things can all come into play. So we'd also want to take a look at things like size growth. We'd want to adjust for uncertainty based on historical information that we have. Now, when we're talking about size growth, we're not just talking about code growth. We're talking about requirements growth. So we're not going to get into details because, again, we're working with this napkin. So if I take a look at this napkin and I look at it and I say, okay, I think it's kind of sort of about 100 function points. I can then apply some rules of thumb conversions. I can say, okay, on average, according to Capers-Jones, for every month of schedule. So I've said, you know, looks like it's about 100 function points. I think we might be able to get it done, gut feel, about 6 months. For every month of schedule, typically we're going to have experience about 1.5 to 2% of the size growth. Now that's due to things like missing requirements, unclear requirements. We can look at our historical databases, but just off the top of my head, I'm saying, okay, I'm looking at this napkin and I say, looks like about a 6-month project. That's probably going to grow by about 20%. So instead of really thinking about it going to be a 100 function point project, it's probably more likely to be 120. So that gives me a little bit of confidence that I can start building into, even though it's still a serviette, it's still a napkin. I can also take a look at things like rules of thumb conversions. If it's going to be an Agile project and people are going to be relying on story points instead of function points or something, I can even at this high level use rules of thumb conversions to convert from story points to function points. And even though that doesn't make a lot of sense, I can do it and give some confidence in the numbers I'm reporting. And you know what? The best predictor of future results are historical data, if it's the truth. Now, this is really important. If I have a project and I've recorded it, now if I'm in the Department of Defense in the United States, I can say, you know, I've got CADE databases. I've got really, really accurate time reporting, way better than commercial ever has. But say I've got a commercial project. I'm sitting down with my manager. He's given me this napkin and he said, you know, give me an estimate. So I go back into what I've got in my historical database in my head, and I say, it looks like that was probably about, I don't know, 1,000 hours. Well, I can't just use that 1,000 hours, because what am I including in it? Who's included? Is it the entire project team? Did we include overtime? What does that 1,000 hours actually mean? So I can rely on history. I can rely on financial records if they're true. And unfortunately, in many cases, if I go back into project databases and I look at that 1,000 hours, was that 1,000 hours actually spent on the project that it's attributed to? It may or may not. So we can rely on history as long as we have validated and normalized it. Now, sitting with my napkin, I can't do that, but I can rely on and start getting a better idea of the history, the true history of a project. So maybe I'll go back to the office and talk to a couple people and query them and say, you know, when we did a 100 function point project before, it was kind of sort of like this. What do we have that's historical, that's reliable, that I can actually put some credibility into this high level estimate? So when I'm doing a rough order of magnitude, so I've got a napkin. Everybody can see at first glance that that's not going to be a solid project estimate. You know, a napkin, seriously? So I better come out with a range of guesstimates, not with decimals. And I said to a tool vendor a number of years ago, I said, you know, when you throw garbage into my equation, I'm throwing in things like, I think it's going to be fairly complex. It's going to be a real-time system. It's going to be a team size up to 10. It's going to be, I'd throw all these things in because that's my best guess. And I've got a tool. So I throw all this into it and I say, I think it's going to be about 120 function points. And the tool churns through and comes out with a number such as 346,465 based on churning the numbers. Well, that's not an estimate. If I say to somebody it's 365,000, they're going to say, wow, you got that kind of accuracy from a napkin? Unreal. I'm going to look like a wizard, which I'm not. So when I'm doing a guesstimate, I better have a range. So if I've done that, I'm throwing stuff into an estimating tool or even a manual spreadsheet that I've got, I should be coming out and saying, you know what, it looks like it might be around 300K to maybe 600K. That's a guesstimate. I want to be able to document my rules of thumb. I want to document the substantiation for even this high level size. And maybe I'll use something like simple function points or patterns. I want to supplement with history that's adjusted for uncertainty. So see what I'm doing? I'm actually opening up this napkin and writing a bunch of things there. That's actually part of my science of estimation rather than just coming straight from my head. So I'd want to document any of the rules of thumb that I've used, anything about rework. Now I'm doing an expert estimate here. I'm doing kind of an expert opinion based on this napkin. So I can even take a look and say, you know, on average, this kind of system probably takes, I don't know, 6 months, probably takes this amount of effort. More than likely, I'm not going to have included rework. And rework is really important because I don't have historical data, but my rework ends up being anywhere from 40 to 60% for a traditional waterfall project, or as one of the speakers at ITCast professed from Lockheed Martin, she said that even on Agile projects, rework constitutes about 35%. So if you think about that, what's that mean? If my rework on a project, I go in and I work on great coding, great user stories, great work during the sprint. On Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, I did great work. If rework is 40%, that means then on Thursday and Friday, essentially I've redone or I redo what I did before. Those are actual numbers. And those are things that when I go in and have an expert opinion and say, how long do you think it will take to program or work on this? Oftentimes rework's not built in. And that can double our estimate. We also want to take a look at even high-level risk management. What are the uncertain things that happen on every single project? I can build that even into my Napkin estimate. I want to make sure that I label my results, either using a watermark or at least high level in large type preliminary. Because how could I be anything but preliminary based on napkin sketches? And what do I want to do? Make sure that you save copies of these modeling exercises. That's absolutely essential. Save copies and show the napkin as being the basis. And that's really important. Save the napkin. Despite our best intent, estimators cannot predict the future based on ideas. Guesstimates based on documented assumptions are a step forward. And you know what? And I know if you're in the Department of Defense or if you're in one of these prime contractors where software cost estimation is taken as a science, that's great. And you'll look at me and just say, you know what, Carol, this doesn't happen in real life. I can tell you on some of the commercial enterprises I've been on, that guesstimate becomes somehow substantiating the project budget or schedule. And so I end up with Project ABC with a budget of $500,000 based on these essentially little napkin sketches. My advice to you is scan that napkin, scan the extra little sketches you've done into a document, and during that kickoff meeting, when people are saying, how'd we come up with 6 months? How'd we come up with $500,000? I can go, ta-da, and present the napkin. Might sound kind of ridiculous, but that actually happens. And I've been a project manager who did that preliminary lunchtime estimate, which was a guesstimate, and been subject to later discussions about how could you be so wrong, Carol? You knew what we needed. No, it was based on a napkin. So if you value your career, if you value the credibility, we need to save that napkin. So garbage in equals garbage out. Your analysis is only as good as the data you've got. We can't make things up. We can't create something out of the ether. And if you think about software cost estimation, especially before requirements, as being up in an aircraft, you're up 30,000 feet. And someone says, hey, John, take a look down there. See that house down there? How big do you think that is? At that point, you can't tell if it's a warehouse, if it's a house, if it's a shopping mall. It's a 15-story apartment building. You can only guesstimate. And as you get closer and closer and closer, that's truly like doing the cone of uncertainty. And you can start figuring out how big really was that. But garbage in is absolutely going to equal garbage out. So given what we've got here, now you can at least carefully start navigating that minefield, where our idea starts having some boundaries. And that's the key thing. If you have to estimate when it's still an idea, at least we've got some bounds that we can base our cost, our effort, our scope and quality, and our schedule on. If I started out thinking it was 100 function points, and by the end of the project we find out it's 700, I wasn't Bozo the Clown. I didn't use lunar cycle multiplied by shoe size to come out with the wrong answer. I based it on what I thought was 100 function points, and it ended up to be 700. Who knew? I certainly can't be right. So at this point, Megan, I think I'm at my last slide, so we can open it up for questions. And I know I went fairly quickly. One of the things I learned is that if you've got people on a webinar and you speak too slowly or speak cognizantly and boringly, everybody falls asleep. So hopefully nobody's done that. So my last one, I think you wanted to speak to this one.
I sure do, and I have misplaced my mic. See, now my problem on these things is I always talk too fast. Ladies and gentlemen, you still have some time to send in your questions for Carol if you want to talk about anything she's discussed today. And while you conjure up your questions, I'm going to give you a little reminder that our deadline for the abstract summaries for the 2021 workshop are due November 3rd. That is a week from, so about a week and a half, week and Tuesday. We didn't get any questions, so Carol, I would say you've done a fantastic job today. I want to thank you for your time and for everybody's time for tuning in. If you guys have more questions for Carol about software sizing or anything she's touched on today, her contact information is there. And of course, if you somehow misplaced it, you can always contact the ICEA office at ICEA@ICEAonline.org. We'll be happy to patch you through. That does it for me. Carol, do you want to say any last few words?
The only thing I would say is thank you, Megan, and thank you, ICEA, for the opportunity to present this. And the whole area of software cost estimation is somewhat daunting, especially when you start getting into the nuances and the paradigms and things like that. And the good news is for cost estimators who are new to software, or software professionals who are new to cost estimation, we have up and coming, which I'm so proud to announce, the software CBOC, the software cost estimating body of knowledge, for which I'm the lead author at this point, and we're working on lessons as we speak, and that's going to be an exciting new thing for ICEA. So stay tuned, and if anyone's interested in articles or additional presentation information, please feel free to reach me at caroldeckers@gmail.com.
Fantastic. And we will be posting more information about the upcoming software CBOC at ICEAonline.org/SCEBOK. And that's also linked on the front page. So thank you again, Carol. Thank you again, everyone. I'd say this calls it a day. Everybody have a good afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.